Hi everyone, this is Ruttner-Duryea. I'm coming to you today to talk about attachment trauma versus single incident trauma. And when I go over that, or when I talk about that, I'm going to use the reference of a house. So if you think about building a house or even a home that you live in, and a single incident trauma would be the idea that if we are a house, something has happened that has damaged, and typically it occurs on the outside. We try to keep our homes pretty clean and kind of put together inside, but typically the outside gets damaged. So let's say there was a roof damage or something like that. That would be like a single incident trauma, a one-time event or events that occurred that caused something to shift on the kind of external of our being. And it may also have effects on us individually or internally, but it typically tends to affect us most externally. And so if we let that sit for too long, if we don't take care of that trauma, if we don't talk about it, if we don't go and deal with it or relate it out or process it or pray about it or any of those things that we do to help ourselves heal, just like a broken roof or a leaky roof, it'll leak through and start to get to our interior experience of ourselves. And so we can see how a single incident trauma can become something that's very big. If you don't fix a leaky roof, suddenly the drywall can get moldy. The mold, we can breathe that in internally, get people sick and the inhabitants. We can get our furniture ruined. And there may be times where it doesn't show up, right? There's no problem to think about the leaky roof when it's sunny, but when it rains, right, we've got to fix that roof. So that would be like a single incident trauma and how it can become pervasive in our life. And until we get the roof fixed, the circuit of that trauma isn't closed. An attachment trauma is quite different. And it shows up differently. So an attachment trauma would be more like something on the foundation of the home being built, if not the foundation itself. And if you've ever had a crack in your wall, or if you've ever watched HGTV, which I love, but if you've ever watched that and maybe something shows up on the facade, on the surface, on the walls, and unless you have like an experienced or licensed contractor, people oftentimes don't know, or a licensed inspector, oh, that little crack right there that you've been spackling over or that you've been sanding over and you've been painting over and trying to make it look better or look different actually has to do with the structure, the structure of the home. It has to do with the foundation of the home. And that's kind of like attachment trauma. We develop, we grow. And when we're little, our nervous systems are very immature. Just think about any baby that you know and how fast they can go from like, hi, to, oh my gosh, they can go very quickly without having inhibitors or roadblocks. And on some levels, like for me, when trauma happens to children and I work with them, they just heal so fast because they have limited inhibitors. They're just so great, just processing right through. However, when you have when that happens and there isn't someone coming in for aid or help, and that developmental and that nervous system happens over and over again, the closing of that trauma, the closing of that nervous system unit. So when a trauma happens, there tends to be a heightened sense, and then there tends to be some kind of reconciling and brings you back to stability. Your sympathetic and your parasympathetic kick on. But when you have an extended experience of something with your primary caregivers, you feel it as a child to a degree that your caregivers also feel it. And so you also become subject to it if it's something external. So an alcoholic father, an alcoholic mother. Mothers particularly have huge influences over our biology as a young age, and that they have a huge influence over us as we develop. And that's what makes mother wounds a little bit, actually a lot, I think, more severe, because you can be years down the road of going through what or known belief systems or known traumas and really still struggle with biology that has been ingrained from birth in some ways, whether it be the own stress systems that your parents were going through. And so those wounds are a little bit deeper because they go to a place sometimes where you have no words that you're offering it up. You have no experiences to quote to or to point to. And sometimes if you were in an attachment system that told you that things were your fault, then those things that are going on are not sufferings, but there's something that you're doing wrong. And so you're constantly looking to control. And so that's why mother wounds can have a bigger impact in that manner, because they how a mother and a child bond and how they take care of each other is really, really important for developmental systems later on. Now again, your nervous system, your vagus nerve particularly, which is kind of the biggest nerve system that they've started to recognize, that goes on board to coordinate hormones and your neurology and your brain function as well, or your nervous system and your brain function neurology as well. That is a very important system, and I've linked onto my website. I'll try to link it onto the forum as well, but the heart math sensor, and that is one of my basic tools. It's 10 minutes. You can use it for like 10 minutes 3 times a day for individuals who have mother wounds. It works amazing in being able to give your nervous system the idea and the experience of what it is to close a trauma system, or what it is to have you be regulated. And one of the biggest problems coming up against this when you're doing this sometimes is that regulation can feel completely foreign or upside down. It can feel sometimes more stable to be dysregulated. And so when you have a computer system that actually shows you what it is for your body to be regulated, and it says this is what you look like when you're regulated, and you're doing that and you're like, I don't know what it's like to be this calm, or I'm not sure what to do. Those are attachment traumas. Those are things that are kind of your system itself. You're not actually feeling like, finally I'm calm. You actually have kind of an anxiety in the background of what's going to come next, or how do I get myself back to this other regulation, because I'm used to it and I need to actually build more resilience on a new regulation. And so that heart math sensor is really great for doing that. In addition to, that's just one practice of a certain type of breathing style that actually hits your heart rate variance. And your heart rate variance is a big thing, not necessarily because more than your heart rate itself. Your heart rate variance is a big deal because it has to do with regulating your beat to beat ratio. And there are hundreds of thousands of research articles about heart rate variance. And this stuff is so basic, but there's so many articles out there because it's really big in the sports industry. In the sports industry, this beat to beat ratio is a precursor marker of your stress and of your heart rate accelerating, of that vagus nerve system that I was talking about. And so when that beat to beat ratio is in a nice sync, and you've been able to pattern it well, your heart rate will stay lower longer and your stress levels will stay lower longer. Even if environmentally something stressful is going on, you almost can create a resiliency. You actually do create a resiliency internally. That's what your attachment systems are meant to do. But when your attachment systems are the ones impending or demonstrating or not able to get out of their own craziness themselves, then you pattern that, unfortunately. And so a system, a computer model like that is a nice grace for us because it gives us something hardwired to look at to say, okay, I'm going to practice giving myself this gift of knowing what I'm like when I'm regulated, knowing what I'm like, knowing when I'm about to be stressed, giving myself this space and practicing it. Research has shown in the heart rate variance stuff, particularly with trauma, that when you practice it about 3 times a day, I think they said 5 minutes each day, your resilience goes up and increases significantly. I think they said something like 80% over 3 months. You have to look at the website to know. I forget the exact numbers, but they've done a whole bunch of stuff on it. So if sports athletes are doing this, and they're doing this to make them play in a game longer and give them ability to be sports athletes longer, then when we have chronic fatigue and we have fibromyalgia and we're just tired and we're overwhelmed and we're stressed out, when we actually give our systems the basic components to stay de-stressed, and we have ourselves practice that, that's a first line, visceral, natural intervention. I love Father Mary Wolf. He said there are 3 things that we can kind of talk about in the relationship to forgiveness. One is nature, which is never forgiving. And this is the idea. This is what this breathing machine is for. Nature is not forgiving. If you plant an apple seed, right, you're going to get an apple tree. It's just not forgiving. It's A plus B plus D equals C. right? Just not, just the way it goes. And so when you follow a naturalistic model, there are certain limitations. There's a lot of limitations on that, and that's just the way it is. But you also can get some insight, understanding to what a naturalistic model might be. You know, if you're in a system that's dysregulated, then putting yourself in a system or giving yourself a component that's regulated will help you. Second part of that he talks about is people. And people are sometimes forgiving. And so that's the other component, is we look at our attachment systems and people around us and how they've traumatized us and recognize we can be that person that forgives. And we can be that person that actually then also does things for ourselves to facilitate within our own lives and what God wants us to have, which is the forgiveness of ourselves. And that's what those sensors are for. I mean, that's a grace given to us that a computer can step in and give us a real-time feeding of our own physiology to help us get back to a calm state. That's a really great grace, but we have to be forgiving to ourselves. And sometimes we do it, and sometimes we don't. So this is a supplement more than just forgiving the other person. This is actually about looking at and recognizing you were a victim, recognizing there was a part where you had inherent deep neediness and you were traumatized, and it's real. And you actually need to provide for yourself those things which help facilitate you to get through that and help you heal, and God wants to give it to you. And that brings me to the third thing, God, who is always forgiving. And so when you go into any of this work, the first thing you want to do, especially if you're going through memories, if you're going through stuff in the past, attachment traumas, ask God where he is in this. Ask him to come in, ask him to show you. And when you do that, he will show up in a very big way, because God is always forgiving. And so we go back down to those three systems, right? We can go to one, we can do something, but we have these three variables. And if we want to go to the one that's always going to give us the healing, it will always be God. But we can do other things along the way to facilitate that healing. God is a great Father, and he allows us to help in those things, which is an amazing thing. So I hope this is helpful for you in knowing that single incident, which is that one-time kind of thing, quicker, more precise, versus an attachment trauma, which would be more of a foundational thing. Very fixable, but it's going to take longer. There's going to be more things that are going to have to happen. And then I gave you kind of a quick overview of what that could be. Okay, I hope you guys have a great week, and I'll talk to you and see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.